In the rain-slicked spring of 2000, 17-year-old Lily Anderson, clutching her violin case as if it were a life raft, stood under the sickly orange glow of a street lamp. She was an artist on the cusp of her life's great performance, a prodigy with strings and a bow, heading to a citywide symphony audition that promised a future far beyond the damp, quiet streets of Northwood. She checked her watch, her breath a nervous cloud in the chilled air. The bus was late. When a bus finally hissed to a stop, its headlights cutting through the drizzle, she felt a wave of relief. It wasn't her usual Route 7, but the sign in the window read Express Downtown. Eager not to miss her slot, she climbed aboard, offered the driver a grateful smile he didn't return, and vanished from the world. The initial investigation was a frantic, chaotic storm that quickly dwindled into a fog of confusion. The driver of the actual Route 7 bus had no memory of seeing her. No other passengers recalled a girl with a violin case. The theory solidified into a sad, simple story. Lily, a sensitive soul, must have gotten on the wrong bus by mistake, ended up lost, and in a fit of adolescent despair or fear, decided to run away. It was a narrative of tragic misadventure, a story the town and a beleaguered police department could accept. The search wound down. Flyers curled and faded on telephone poles. The case file, thick with dead-end leads and unanswered questions, was eventually boxed up and moved to the cold case archives, a paper tombstone for a girl who had simply stepped onto the wrong bus. For a young, newly minted detective named Isaac Thorne, it was the first case that dug its hooks into his soul, a failure that would whisper to him in the quiet hours for decades. The mystery of Lily Anderson became a piece of Northwood's local folklore, a ghost story told to children to warn them of the world's careless dangers. But 25 years later, in the autumn of 2025, the ghost of that story was about to become terrifyingly real. A young woman named Lena Petrova, an urban photographer with an artist's eye for decay and forgotten beauty, felt an inexplicable pull toward the old, condemned Northwood Transit Depot on the edge of town. It wasn't on her list of sites to shoot, but the image of its rust-streaked facade had lodged itself in her mind for a week, a persistent, silent calling she couldn't ignore. She told her friends it was for a series on industrial skeletons, but privately, she felt a different, more somber gravity drawing her there, a sense of sorrow that seemed to emanate from the very land. Armed with her camera and a powerful flashlight, she slipped through a gap in the chain-link fence, the crunch of gravel under her boots the only sound in the suffocating silence. The main hangar was a cathedral of ruin, its vast, curved roof pocked with holes that let in slivers of mournful gray light. Pigeons cooed from the high steel rafters, their calls echoing through the cavernous space. Rows of skeletal buses sat in silent formation, their tires flat, their windows shattered like vacant eyes. Lena walked the rows, her camera clicking, capturing the poetry of peeling paint and rusted chrome. But the feeling, that strange, melancholic summons, grew stronger, pulling her toward the far back corner of the depot, to a place shrouded in deeper shadow. There, half hidden behind a stack of rotting pallets, was a single bus, an older model, a relic from a different era. It was covered in a thick shroud of dust and grime, set apart from the others as if it were in quarantine. A chill, unrelated to the autumn air, traced a path down her spine. The feeling was coming from this bus. It was an absurd thought, but she couldn't shake it. This was where she was meant to be. Hesitantly, Lena pulled open the groaning, resistant door of the old bus and climbed inside. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and stale, trapped time. The seats were covered in a fine layer of dust, perfectly preserved under the gloom. Her flashlight beam danced across the interior, illuminating the cracked vinyl and the corroded metal of the grab rails. She walked the length of the aisle, her footsteps muffled by the grime. The feeling of oppressive sadness was strongest near the back. Her light fell upon a section of the floor, where a metal panel seemed to sit slightly askew, its edges raised just a millimeter above the surrounding linoleum. It was a maintenance hatch, but it looked different, as though it had been pried up and reset improperly countless times. Kneeling, she used the edge of her flashlight to get a purchase on the seam. It was stiff, but with a final straining grunt, it popped loose. She lifted the heavy panel away, revealing a dark, hollow space beneath the bus's true floor. It wasn't a mechanical bay. It was a hidden compartment, crudely fashioned but effective. And inside, nestled in the darkness, lay a single object, a black, rectangular case, its leather surface cracked and weathered but still intact. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She reached in and pulled it out. It was a violin case. With trembling fingers, she unfastened the tarnished brass latches. The lid creaked open. Inside, cushioned on faded velvet, lay not a violin, but a stack of sheet music, the pages yellowed and brittle with age. On the top page, written in elegant, youthful cursive, was a name, Lily Anderson. Lena felt the air leave her lungs in a sudden, sharp gasp. She knew the name. Everyone in Northwood knew the name. She was holding a ghost. But as her light moved across the contents, it caught the glint of something else, something small and metallic lying beside the music. It was a lapel pin, exquisitely crafted from silver in the shape of a swooping hawk. It was clean, almost pristine, an object that did not belong to the world of a 17-year-old musician. It was an anomaly, a piece of the puzzle that didn't fit the story everyone knew. This wasn't a pin for the Public Transit Authority. Lena recognized the emblem from old photographs of the town's glory days. It was the logo for Thornecroft Transit, a high-end private charter company that had gone out of business nearly 2 decades ago. Lily Anderson, the girl who got on the wrong city bus, had left her violin case on a private charter bus, hidden in a secret compartment. The official story wasn't just wrong, it was a carefully constructed lie. Standing in the silent, dusty tomb of the bus depot, Lena Petrova knew she had stumbled into the middle of a nightmare, and with a shaky hand, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. The ghost of Lily Anderson was finally starting to speak. The call from dispatch crackled through the precinct with the electric hum of a ghost being resurrected. When the name Lily Anderson was spoken, a hush fell over the bullpen. For Detective Isaac Thorne, sitting at his desk buried under the weight of 3 active homicides, the name was a physical blow. It was the case that had shaped him, the failure that sat like a stone in his gut. Now 25 years later, it was back. He drove to the Northwood Transit Depot under a sky the color of a fresh bruise, the old case file, which he'd kept a personal copy of, lying on the passenger seat like a silent accuser. The depot was now a sealed-off crime scene, bathed in the flashing red and blue of patrol cars. Thorne ducked under the yellow tape, his gaze sweeping over the scene, his mind a whirlwind of old memories and new, terrifying possibilities. A young officer led him to the bus, where the forensics team was already at work, their movements precise and sterile in the decaying environment. The violin case sat on an evidence blanket, open to the world. Thorne stared at it, the sight of it a visceral connection to the past, to the ghost he'd been chasing for more than half his life. He crouched down, his eyes scanning the contents. The sheet music, the name, and then the pin. He picked it up with a gloved hand, holding it to the light. The silver hawk seemed to stare back at him, a silent, metallic witness. Thornecroft Transit. The name sparked a flicker of a memory, a forgotten thread from the original investigation. He remembered dismissing them. They were a corporate charter service, dealing in executive transport and wine tours, not public transit. Why would Lily Anderson be on one of their buses? The question hung in the air, thick and heavy. The girl who found it, Lena Petrova, a junior detective said, handing Thorne a preliminary statement. She's an urban explorer. Said she just felt drawn to this bus. Can you believe that? Thorne didn't answer. He believed it completely. Some cases have a life of their own, a gravity that pulls people in. He felt that pull now, stronger than ever. Back at the precinct, he reopened the case officially. A new task force was assembled, a mix of young, tech-savvy officers and grizzled veterans like himself. He stood before them in the briefing room, the silver hawk pin projected onto the screen behind him. For 25 years, we believed Lily Anderson got on the wrong city bus and ran away, Thorne began, his voice low and steady, belying the storm inside him. The original investigation was built on that premise. We focused on public transit logs, driver interviews, bus station security footage. We were looking in the wrong universe. He pointed to the pin. This changes everything. This tells us the narrative we accepted was a lie. Lily Anderson wasn't on a city bus. She was on a private charter belonging to Thornecroft Transit, and someone went to great lengths to hide her belongings in a secret compartment. This wasn't a runaway. This was an abduction. The room was silent, the weight of his words settling on them all. His next task was the one he dreaded most. He drove to the small, tidy house where Lily's parents, now frail and gray, still lived, surrounded by pictures of their smiling 17-year-old daughter. He sat with them in their quiet living room, the same room where he'd sat as a rookie detective promising them he would find her. The shame of that broken promise was a bitter taste in his mouth. He told them about the violin case. Hope, a dangerous and fragile thing, flickered in their eyes, followed swiftly by the shadow of 2.5 decades of grief. Mrs. Anderson began to weep silently, her husband's hand covering hers. "We just want to know what happened to our little girl, Detective," Mr. Anderson said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "After all this time, we just want to bring her home." Driving away from their house, Thorne's resolve hardened into something adamantine. This was no longer just a case. It was a debt he had to pay. The ghost of Lily Anderson deserved justice, and her parents deserved peace. The Silver Hawk was the key, and he would follow it into whatever darkness it led him. The trail of the Silver Hawk led directly to Marcus Thornecroft. The name was synonymous with success and civic duty in Northwood. After selling his high-end charter company, Thornecroft had masterfully reinvented himself as a real estate mogul and philanthropist. His name was on the wing of the local hospital, on the plaques of university scholarships, on the programs for every major charity gala. He was a pillar of the community, insulated by wealth and a carefully cultivated reputation of unimpeachable integrity. Thorne knew that approaching a man like this required caution. One wrong move and Thornecroft could bury the investigation in legal challenges and claims of harassment. Thorne scheduled a meeting at Thornecroft's opulent downtown office, a space of polished mahogany, leather, and glass that overlooked the entire city. Marcus Thornecroft, now in his late 60s, was exactly as Thorne had expected, impeccably dressed, handsome, with a warm, disarming smile and a firm handshake. He greeted Thorne as if he were a welcome guest, offering him a seat and a bottle of sparkling water. "Detective Thorne, a pleasure," Thornecroft began, his voice smooth and reassuring. "Your assistant said it was about an old case. How can I help the Northwood PD?" Thorne kept his own demeanor professional and detached, placing a photograph of the Silver Hawk pin on the vast, uncluttered desk between them. "We're reopening the Lily Anderson disappearance from 2000, Thorne stated, watching the man's eyes for any flicker of recognition, any tell. "This pin was found with some of her belongings. It's the old logo for your company, Thornecroft Transit." Thornecroft leaned forward, studying the photo with an expression of mild curiosity. He nodded slowly. "Ah yes, the hawk. A bit dramatic, wasn't it? I designed it myself. A lifetime ago." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Lily Anderson. Of course, I remember the case. A terrible tragedy. The whole town was heartbroken. But I'm afraid I don't see the connection. We were a private charter service. We didn't run public routes. A young girl like that would have had no reason to be on one of our buses." His response was perfect. It was logical, reasonable, and exactly what an innocent man would say. He was deflecting without being defensive, showing concern without showing guilt. But for Thorne, it felt too perfect. It was a performance. Thorne's intuition, the gut feeling he'd learned to trust over 100 other cases, was screaming at him. Something was deeply wrong. "We have reason to believe she was on one of your buses," Thorne pressed gently. "We're trying to identify the specific vehicle. An older model, likely decommissioned around that time." Thornecroft feigned a thoughtful frown. 25 years ago. "Detective, my memory isn't what it used to be. The fleet was large, and we were constantly updating it. But I want to help in any way I can." He swiveled in his chair and typed something into his computer. "The company's old paper archives, driver logs, maintenance records, charter agreements, they're all in a climate-controlled storage facility I own. They're probably a chaotic mess, but you're welcome to them. My personal assistant will arrange full access for you and your team. Whatever you need." It was an offer of complete transparency, a gesture that should have allayed suspicion. To anyone else, it would have been the act of a good citizen eager to assist law enforcement. But to Thorne, it felt like a strategic move. A man hiding something might throw open the doors to a mountain of paperwork, confident that the single incriminating needle was too well hidden in the haystack. It was a calculated risk, a display of confidence designed to make the police look elsewhere. "Thank you, Mr. Thornecroft," Thorne said, rising to his feet. "We appreciate your cooperation." As he shook the man's hand again, he felt a faint, almost imperceptible chill. Thornecroft's grip was firm, his eyes were clear, but behind the mask of civic virtue, Thorne sensed a profound emptiness, a cold, dark void. Leaving the gleaming office tower and returning to the gritty reality of the precinct, Thorne knew he had just met the man at the center of the web. He wasn't just a witness or a former business owner. He was the monster they were looking for, hiding in the one place no one had ever thought to look, in plain sight. The Thornecroft Transit Archive was exactly the kind of bureaucratic Everest that Marcus Thornecroft had likely counted on to deter any serious inquiry. It was a vast, windowless room in a secure storage facility, filled floor to ceiling with gray, metal shelves groaning under the weight of thousands of cardboard boxes. The air was dry and smelled of old paper and dust. For Detective Thorne and his small, dedicated team, it was a descent into a 25-year-old paper labyrinth. The task was monumental. They were looking for a single anomaly in a sea of mundane data: charter agreements for corporate retreats, driver payroll, fuel receipts, maintenance schedules for a fleet of 24 buses over a decade. Thorne set up a system. They divided the years, creating a digital database to cross-reference every document they scanned. Days bled into nights. The team subsisted on stale coffee and takeout, their eyes burning from the strain of reading faded dot matrix printouts and cramped, handwritten logs. The first week yielded nothing but frustration. The records seemed meticulously kept, almost unnaturally so. Thorncroft's company had been a model of administrative efficiency. The tidiness itself felt suspicious to Thorne. It was the kind of organized facade that could be designed to conceal its opposite. The breakthrough came on the 9th day. A young, sharp-eyed analyst named Chun was working through a box of driver manifests from the spring of 2000 when she noticed a pattern. "Boss, you need to see this," she called out, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the scanners. Thorne was at her side in an instant. She pointed to a series of entries, all from the same driver, all occurring late at night, usually on a Tuesday or Thursday. They were listed as private charter discretionary, but unlike every other entry in the logs, there was no client name, no destination address, and no billing code. They were ghost trips. "They're off the books," Chin said, her excitement palpable. "The mileage is logged, the fuel is accounted for, but the trip itself doesn't officially exist. It's like the bus just went out for a drive and came back." Thorne felt a surge of adrenaline. "Pull the dates on every one of these ghost runs," he ordered. "Run them against the state's missing persons database for the corresponding years. Focus on women, ages 16 to 25. The team worked with renewed ferocity. As the data populated the screen, a chilling picture began to form. In March of 1999, a discretionary charter was logged on the same night a 19-year-old college student vanished on her way home from a late-night study session. In October of that same year, another ghost run coincided with the disappearance of a 22-year-old waitress, whose car was found abandoned by the side of the road. The pattern continued, a horrifyingly consistent drumbeat of death and deception. 6 ghost runs. 6 missing young women. The final entry on their list was from April of 2000. It was the night Lily Anderson had walked out of her house with her violin case and never returned. The misleading narrative of the runaway girl shattered into a million pieces, replaced by the ghastly reality of a serial predator who had used his legitimate business as a hunting ground. Thorne stared at the screen, at the names of the lost girls lined up next to the phantom trips logged by Thorncroft Transit. This was the unveiling. It wasn't just about Lily. It was a hidden, systematic operation of abduction and murder that had gone undetected for years. "Find out who was driving," Thorne said, his voice barely a whisper, thick with a cold, rising fury. "Find the driver of these ghost runs. Now." The team dove back into the records, their search now laser-focused. The signature on the bottom of each phantom log was the same, a looping, spidery scrawl that read A. Finch. Arthur Finch. They had a name. They had a witness. The ghost of Lily Anderson had led them from a single pin to a graveyard of secrets, and now they were one step closer to the man who had put them there. Tracking down Arthur Finch was like chasing a ghost of a different sort. His employment with Thorncroft Transit had terminated in 2003. He had moved several times, his trail growing colder with each change of address, until it finally ended at the last place anyone wants to be found. The St. Jude's Care Home, a long-term nursing facility on the industrial outskirts of a neighboring county. Thorne and his partner, Detective Miller, found him in a small, sterile room that smelled of disinfectant and despair. Arthur Finch was a withered husk of a man, swallowed by a threadbare armchair, an oxygen tube clipped to his nose. His hands trembled, and his eyes, rheumy and clouded with cataracts, darted around the room with a hunted, paranoid energy. He looked like a man who had been waiting for this day for a very long time. Thorne pulled up a chair, his movements slow and non-threatening. He didn't show Finch his badge. He simply sat down and looked at the old man. "Arthur," Thorne began softly. "My name is Isaac. I want to talk to you about some driving you did for Thornecroft Transit. Finch's entire body went rigid. A wheezing sound escaped his lips. Don't know nothing about that, he rasped, his gaze fixed on a water-stained spot on the ceiling. It was a long time ago. It was, Thorne agreed. But some things don't go away. We found the old logbooks, Arthur. The ones with the discretionary charters. The ghost runs. At the mention of the logbooks, a flicker of pure terror crossed Finch's face. His trembling worsened. He seemed to shrink further into his chair, as if trying to disappear. They were special pickups, Thorne continued, his voice maintaining its calm, almost hypnotic cadence. Late at night. No names, no destinations. Just you, the bus, and a passenger who never made it home. We need you to tell us about them. We need you to tell us about Lily Anderson. Lily's name was the final key. A dry, ragged sob broke from Finch's chest. The dam of fear and guilt that he had maintained for 25 years finally burst. Tears streamed down his wrinkled cheeks, mingling with the plastic of his oxygen tube. He said they were important people, Finch stammered, his voice cracking. Rich clients. Politicians. People who needed privacy. He paid me extra. In cash. Said it was for my discretion. He said if I ever talked, he'd know. He'd find me. Thorne knew who he was. Marcus Thornecroft, Thorne stated. It wasn't a question. Finch nodded, a jerky, pathetic motion. He'd call me on a private line. Tell me where to be and when. It was always near a regular bus stop, but a little way down the street. I was supposed to have the express sign in the window. The confession tumbled out of him, a torrent of buried memories. He described the night he picked up Lily Anderson. He remembered her bright, hopeful face, her politeness. He remembered her asking if this bus went straight to the Symphony Hall. He'd lied, just as Thornecroft had instructed, telling her it was a special, direct service for performers. The lie had eaten at him for decades. Where did you take her, Arthur? Thorne pressed, his heart pounding. I took her where he told me to, Finch whispered, his eyes squeezed shut as if to block out the memory. A big house out on the Old Lake Road. The Thornecroft estate. It was dark, no other cars. He was waiting for me at the end of the long driveway. He came onto the bus, smiled at the girl, said he'd take her from here. She looked confused, scared. But he was so charming. He told her father had arranged a private car to take her the rest of the way, to avoid the press after her big win. She believed him. Finch's voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. He gave me the cash. Told me to take the bus back to the depot, clean it, and forget I ever saw her. I never saw her again. I knew something was wrong. But I was scared. He was a powerful man. The old man was sobbing freely now, a lifetime of complicit fear pouring out of him. He had been a coward, a pawn in a monster's game, but his testimony was the weapon Thorne needed. It was a direct link. It placed Lily Anderson in the hands of Marcus Thornecroft on the night she disappeared. The voice of the ghost had finally been heard. Arthur Finch's confession was the fulcrum on which the entire case now pivoted. It was powerful, but Thorne knew it wasn't enough. A jury might see Finch as an unreliable, dying old man, his testimony easily dismantled by Thornecroft's high-priced legal team. It was a classic he said, she said, and the he on the other side was a beloved public figure. Thorne needed more. He needed irrefutable, physical evidence. He needed to get inside the old Thornecroft estate. The property had been sold over a decade ago to a tech mogul who had performed extensive renovations, but according to county records, the original foundation and basement structure remained intact. Finch had described Thornecroft leading Lily towards a side entrance, one that led directly downstairs. The basement, that was where the heart of the darkness lay. Thorne and the DA worked through the night, drafting a meticulously detailed warrant application. They laid out the entire chain of evidence: the discovery of the violin case, the anomalous pin, the phantom logbooks from the archive, and the sworn, videotaped testimony of Arthur Finch. It was a compelling narrative of long-hidden crimes. At dawn, a judge, woken from his sleep, signed the warrants. They had permission to search both the old estate on the lake and Thornecroft's current palatial residence, a modern glass-and-steel mansion in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. The plan was to execute both warrants simultaneously, a classic pincer movement designed to prevent any destruction of evidence. While his teams prepared for the raids, Thorne set the final piece of his trap. He placed a call to Marcus Thornecroft's personal assistant. I have a few final, clarifying questions for Mr. Thornecroft, Thorne said, his voice a mask of calm professionalism. It's just a formality to close a loop on our end. Would he be available to meet me at my office in, say, 90 minutes? It was a calculated risk. Thorne was betting on Thornecroft's arrogance, on his belief that he was still in control of the narrative, that the police were still fumbling in the dark. He would see the meeting as an opportunity to reinforce his image as a cooperative citizen and subtly probe the investigation's progress. The assistant confirmed. Thornecroft would be there. The trap was set. Thorne sat in the stark, gray confines of an interrogation room, not his office, watching the clock on the wall. The second hand swept around, each tick a countdown to a moment of reckoning 25 years in the making. He could feel the tension in the air throughout the precinct. The tactical teams were in position, waiting for his signal. As Thornecroft's sleek, black sedan pulled into the visitor parking at the station, Thorne gave the go-ahead. "Execute," he said quietly into his radio. Miles away, two teams breached the properties. At Thornecroft's modern mansion, officers swarmed the pristine, minimalist rooms, conducting a methodical search. At the old estate on the lake, the forensics unit descended into the basement. The air was thick with anticipation. The door to the interrogation room opened, and Marcus Thornecroft walked in, his smile as polished and confident as ever. He looked around the Spartan room, his expression shifting to one of mild amusement. "Detective, this is a bit more dramatic than your office," he quipped, taking a seat. "Is everything all right?" Thorne simply looked at him, his face an unreadable mask. "We're just being thorough, Mr. Thornecroft," he said. His phone, lying face down on the metal table, buzzed. It was a text from the forensics lead at the estate. Thorne didn't look at it. He let the silence stretch, the atmosphere in the room growing heavy and charged. The monster was in the cage. Now he just needed the proof that would keep him there forever. The search of Thornecroft's current residence was a bust, just as Thorne had suspected. The man was too meticulous, too disciplined to keep trophies of his old life in his new one. Everything depended on the old estate, on what secrets the basement had held for a quarter of a century. The forensics team on the Lake Road worked under the harsh glare of portable floodlights, turning the damp, musty basement into a sterile laboratory. The air smelled of old stone, bleach, and something else, a faint, metallic tang that lingered despite the years. The new owner had converted the space into a high-tech media room, but the old, thick concrete walls remained. The team's initial sweep with blacklights revealed faint, almost invisible traces on the concrete floor near a drain, signs of a frantic, industrial-level cleaning. He used bleach, a lot of it, the forensics lead, a woman named Dr. Eris, reported to Thorne over the phone. But he might not have been perfect. Her team got to work, employing more advanced techniques. They sprayed the area with luminol. The room was plunged into darkness, and then a faint, ghostly blue glow began to emerge from between the seams of the newly laid hardwood flooring. It was the unmistakable chemical signature of blood. They carefully pried up the floorboards. The concrete beneath was stained, a faint, brownish map of a long-ago horror. Samples were collected, sealed, and rushed to the lab for priority DNA analysis. While one team worked on the blood evidence, another deployed ground-penetrating radar in the adjoining room, a former wine cellar. The GPR detected an anomaly, a section of the concrete floor in the far corner that had a different density. It was a patch newer than the surrounding foundation. The team brought in a jackhammer. The noise was deafening, a violent exorcism of the house's buried sins. Under several inches of concrete, they found a small, lead-lined box. It wasn't a time capsule. It was a tomb of memories. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, was a small, horrifying collection of personal effects. A silver locket with a faded picture of an elderly couple, a simple gold ring, and a single, pearl stud earring. It was a trophy box, a serial killer's hoard. While the team at the estate was making its gruesome discovery, Thorne sat across from Marcus Thornecroft in the interrogation room, engaged in a patient, psychological war. He asked mundane questions about Thornecroft Transit, about fleet maintenance, about old employees. He was building a wall of banal detail, lulling Thornecroft into a state of confident condescension. Thornecroft answered every question with practiced ease, his demeanor that of a patient man indulging a plodding, simple-minded detective. He was enjoying himself, feeling utterly untouchable. Then Thorne's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen. It was a picture of the pearl earring. He remembered it from the original case file, from a photo of Lily Anderson at her junior prom. She was wearing a matching pair. His breath caught in his throat. He had him. He looked up from the phone, and for the first time, he let the cold, hard certainty show in his eyes. The mask of the patient detective fell away, replaced by the face of an avenging angel. "Let's stop talking about buses, Marcus," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. Thornecroft's smile faltered for the first time. A flicker of confusion, of alarm, crossed his face. He had sensed the shift in the room, the sudden drop in atmospheric pressure. The game had changed. "My team is at your old estate," Thorne continued, leaning forward, his hands flat on the table. "In the basement. They found the bloodstains you tried to bleach away. They found your little box of souvenirs buried under the concrete. They found Lily Anderson's earring." Thorncroft's face, once a mask of charming confidence, collapsed. The color drained from his cheeks. The illusion of the philanthropist, the pillar of the community, shattered in an instant, revealing the cold, reptilian predator beneath. The hunter had just realized he was the one who had walked into the trap. The interrogation room, which had been simmering with unspoken tension, was now ice cold. Marcus Thorncroft's composure, the bedrock of his entire persona, had fractured. He stared at Thorne, his eyes wide, the muscles in his jaw working silently. The mask was gone. What remained was pure, unadulterated narcissism, cornered and exposed. Thorne didn't gloat. He pressed his advantage with the cold, methodical precision of a surgeon. He laid out the evidence, piece by damning piece, on the sterile metal table between them. A photo of the violin case. A close-up of the silver hawk pin. A transcript of Arthur Finch's tearful confession. And finally, a high-resolution image of the single pearl earring, sitting next to a smiling prom photo of Lily Anderson. "It's over, Marcus," Thorne said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Every lie is unraveled. Every ghost has found its voice." For a long moment, Thorncroft was silent. He looked down at his hands, then back up at Thorne. The panic in his eyes was replaced by something far more chilling, a clinical detachment, a profound and terrifying emptiness. He wasn't going to rage or deny. He was going to perform one last time, not as a philanthropist, but as the monster he truly was. A small, chilling smile touched his lips. "She was so trusting," Thorncroft said, his voice a calm, conversational whisper. It was the first utterance of his confession. "They all were. That was the beauty of it. The uniform, the bus, it's a symbol of safety, of order. They never questioned it. Lily, she was excited. She talked about her music, about the audition. She had no idea the performance had already begun." He spoke without a trace of remorse, his tone matter of fact, as if he were recounting a business transaction. This was the confession, a clinical recitation of unspeakable acts. Finch was a useful tool, a coward easily bought. He did his part and asked no questions. The estate was perfect, secluded, soundproofed. My own private theater. Thorne felt a wave of nausea, but his face remained a stone mask. He let him talk. He let the poison pour out. "It was about control," Thorncroft continued, his gaze distant, reliving the memories. "Taking someone so full of life, so full of potential, and extinguishing it. Watching the hope drain from their eyes. It was the ultimate expression of power. Far more satisfying than any corporate takeover." He gestured dismissively at the photos on the table. "They were nothing. Insignificant. Little sparks. I simply chose when to put them out. The mistake, my only mistake, was the girl's violin case. I had an employee dispose of the bus at the depot. I told him to strip it, but the fool must have missed the compartment. A loose end. It's always the small details, isn't it, detective?" His arrogance was breathtaking. He wasn't confessing out of guilt. He was boasting, explaining his methods to a perceived inferior. He saw his crimes as a masterpiece of deception, marred by a single tiny flaw. "You think you've won," Thorncroft said, a sneer twisting his lips. "You found a trinket. You scared an old man. But you have no idea what it feels like. To be a god. To hold a life in your hands and decide." "You're not a god," Thorne said, his voice a low, guttural counterpoint to Thorncroft's chilling monologue. "You're just a sad, broken man who had to steal the light from others because you have none of your own." He stood up, the legs of his chair scraping against the floor. "And you won't be stealing it anymore." He knocked on the door. 2 uniformed officers entered. The game was over. As they handcuffed him, Marcus Thorncroft looked at Thorne one last time, his eyes filled not with fear, but with a cold, condescending pity. It was the look of a predator who, even in defeat, could not comprehend the world of the prey he had hunted for so long. The arrest of Marcus Thorncroft sent a seismic shockwave through Northwood and beyond. The story was a media supernova. The philanthropist unmasked as a predator, the community's benefactor revealed to be a monster. The gleaming facade of his life crumbled, exposing the rot and decay that had festered beneath for decades. For the public, it was a horrifying, sensational tale. But for the families of 6 lost girls, it was an earthquake that finally settled the unstable ground they had been forced to walk on for years. The unveiling of Thornecroft's crimes meant that other cold cases were reopened, their connections to his ghost runs finally made clear. He was a spider, and the police had finally found his web. For Detective Isaac Thorne, the resolution was quieter, more personal. He had lived with the ghost of Lily Anderson for 25 years, and now he was tasked with laying her to rest. He drove back to the small, tidy house where her parents waited. This time, he wasn't empty-handed. He carried the weathered violin case. He sat with them in their living room, the same room that had witnessed so much of their pain, and he told them everything. He told them about the bus, the estate, the confession. He spared them the most gruesome details, but he gave them the truth they had been denied for so long. There were tears, of course, a fresh outpouring of grief for the finality of their loss, but mixed with the sorrow was something else. The profound, aching relief of certainty. The not knowing, the ghost of 1,000 terrible possibilities, was finally gone. Mr. Anderson reached out with a trembling hand and touched the violin case. "This was her whole world," he said, his voice thick. "She never went anywhere without it." Thorne gently unlatched the case and took out the stack of yellowed sheet music. He handed it to Mrs. Anderson. She held it to her chest, her eyes closing as if she could feel her daughter's presence in the brittle pages. It was a somber, sacred moment. There was no victory here, only the grim satisfaction of a debt paid. Justice had been served, but it could not mend the hole that had been torn in their lives. It could only provide a form of closure, a final, painful chapter to a story that should never have been written. Thorne left them. To their private grief, the violin case now back where it belonged. Driving back to the precinct, he felt the immense weight that had settled on his shoulders as a rookie detective finally began to lift. The case that had defined his career was closed. Later that evening, he stood alone in his office, looking out the window at the city lights. The streets were busy, life was moving on, oblivious to the darkness he had just dragged into the light. He thought of Lena Petrova, the unwitting catalyst who felt a ghost's pull. He thought of Arthur Finch, the terrified pawn who finally found the courage to speak. And he thought of Lily Anderson, a girl with a violin and a future, whose silent echo had traveled through 25 years of darkness to lead him to the truth. The office was quiet, the case files now boxed up, destined for a different kind of archive, the closed one. A sense of peace settled over him, not happiness, but a solemn tranquility. The ghosts of Northwood were a little quieter tonight. Justice had been done, and somewhere in the vast, silent expanse, the soul of a girl who got on the wrong bus could finally be at rest.